Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Few requests have come in, so I'll try and knock those out as I go along today, but I might not be able to get at all the plants that were asked about. But it's watering the non-resting mounts today, and also my cooler growers that are supposed to stay evenly moist, which is almost impossible, and this time of year I virtually let them dry before I water them. They're not growing much, but that will change as the month progresses. The day lengths get longer, that's going to change, so I've got to keep my eye on things. One request that I'll get to in a minute involves that's my dunking bucket. I've actually got quite a low level of feed in there at the moment because it's mainly for the Vandas, and they're not growing much this time of year. They haven't got the day length and they haven't got the temperatures, so they slow right down. There's no point in feeding stuff if it's not growing. It's just, you just well pour the fertilizer down the sink, quite honestly, and it could cause problems in your pots with build-ups and things. So I'm feeding everything at low levels at the moment, if at all. You know, some things are getting like 2 flushes followed by a very low level feed. Things that aren't growing much don't need much feed, simple as that. But things will start kicking off during this month and into next month, so the feed levels will be increased. Firstly in frequency, followed by the amount, but I'm not feeding high this year. I'm keeping my feed levels low and keep the frequency high. So a little and often sort of principle. Anyway, first job is overnight we've gone down to, let's have a look. We've had a high of 28.8. I can do without that this time of year, that's too warm. And we've had a low of 9. That was a cold night. And that's, oh, I know, sorry, I haven't reset this. That's what that is. I had a night where, I'll explain. Let me just reset this. Right, that's better. Yeah, what happened was when it gets warm in here, what I do is I up the thermostat to about 30 degrees because the drop in temperature on this one triggers the heater. So when it gets warm in here, I want the fan on, so I up the thermostat to keep that on permanently and turn the heater off. Yeah, so that's just a way of getting good air circulation when the temperature rises without having to muck about with different units and things. All I do is adjust the thermostat, turn the heater off, and therein lies the problem. On a very cold night, when I put the thermostat back down again to 13, which is my nighttime setting, I forgot to turn the heater back on. And it actually woke me up in the middle of the night because the fan was continuously running, so the thermostat was calling for the heater and the heater wasn't actually switched on, so all that was running was the fan, and I eventually came down and twigged it. So I dropped a lot that night. Now, one night's not going to do a lot of damage and it was only for a short period of time, so no damage done, but it could have been. You've got to watch your electrics, keep your eye on them, especially where manual intervention is required, because that requires the old memory, and sometimes that ain't so good, especially near bedtime. Anyway, that's the temperature out the way. Yeah, but first job in the dunking bucket, because of the low nighttime temperatures of sort of 12-13 degrees, that's what temperature the water's at, and I'm not throwing plants in water that cold. So what I do is I fill up 2 of my containers with very hot water and put them in the bucket and leave them for a while, and the heat dissipates into the bucket and warms the water up to a reasonable temperature when I can start throwing some plants in, which I'll be doing in a minute. So this is a bits and bobs video really, just a few plants that have been asked about, and before I start I've just noticed that. Now, because that's my Coelogene cristata variety Lemoniana, and because I haven't had a bloom on that before, I didn't really know what to expect. And I watched this bloom swell up and open. That was about a week or so ago, I suppose. And looking at the other buds, they all looked like they were going to blast. But they aren't. You know, even the real one that looked very, very poor has swollen to double the size. So I think they're all going to open. We've certainly got 2 now. 2 is better than 1, twice as many in fact. And I've still got another 2 buds on the spike here and 1 coming up behind. So in theory, depending on how long each bloom lasts, we could have 5 on that spike. I'm well pleased with that, first time bloomer. So that's that one out the way, and I'll pick up other bits and pieces and requests as I go round today. Now this funny looking orchid lives out in the grow room, which is probably a bit cool for it, but obviously it's a fern, not an orchid. I am mucking about, but it's decided to start growing. I got this in the raffle at the Orchid Society on the grounds that out of everything that was left on the table when my ticket came up, this was the only thing I was prepared to take home. And it's not something I would have chosen to have, but out of what was there I thought, well, we'll give a fern a try. It can go out in the grow room where the humidity is and see what it does. And it's growing. I mean, it's a funny looking thing, the base of the plant, but there's signs of more fronds coming, but it's pushed up this one and this one, so there's 2 new fronds coming. I think it's called a rabbit's foot fern or something. I don't know what the proper name is. Well, I do, but I can't be bothered to go and look it up. But it's growing, you know, and all I do with this one is just keep it moist. You know, I just keep the pot moist by, I put the water in the tray rather than pour it all over the top, and it soaks up through the media, whatever it's planted in. I haven't looked, not fussed really. It's just one of those things that it seems to naturally get these marks on the leaves. I tried washing them off and they sort of seem to come off and then they come back again. So it's a bit like that Rhyncholalia glauca. It seems to have a natural coating on it, but it is a fern, obviously, not an orchid. And it's growing. This is good. You know, I don't only grow orchids. I've got a garden, a neglected garden. I've got some bonsai, some neglected bonsai. My orchids get the biggest amount of my time, obviously. But yeah, I have a collection of ferns outside. One which is not that easy to get hold of. It's you've all seen maidenhair ferns. They're beautiful. I love them. You know, they're for selling garden centres and all places like that. They are a lovely fern, often used as filler plants on orchid displays at shows because of their lovely green and their delicate foliage. Well, I've got our native maidenhair fern, in other words the UK native version of that, and it looks quite different but has similarities. And I've got a few other ferns out there. I love ferns, but in the main, you know, they tend to like shade, so sticking them in your garden, they're going to get a bit frazzled. But I've got a shady place where I keep some in pots, and there are a few planted around in the garden. There's some huge ones out in the front garden because they only get the morning sun, so they do well out there. Anyway, I do have a fern, an indoor fern, and it's growing. Yay! Okay, this is the first viewer request, effectively. I recently videoed mounting a mini Phalaenopsis, and somebody asked, have I got any other mounted Phalaenopsis? Well, these are they. They live in the house in the winter, which is not the best way to keep mounted Phalaenopsis unless you want to water them incredibly frequently, because the air's dry in there and it's also warm. And warm, dry air doesn't do things a lot of good, especially orchids. But once these come back out here, they will get watered in my normal way, which is to just hold them over my bowl of water and pour water all over the roots, the mount, the whole lot, and put them back up again. And once we get into the warmer weather and the longer days, that will be a daily event anyway, which should be enough hydration for them out here with very humid air. But in the house, that's not so good. So somebody said, how do I water my mounted Phalaenopsis? Well, that's easy. Like that. Simples. That's only for this time of year, because they're not staying hydrated enough in the house in the dry air. So I'm soaking the mount. Literally, that bark will take on quite a lot of water. The cork won't, but this type of bark will. You can see it's now getting quite wet. Yeah, so the whole mount Any moss, all the roots and the whole plant are now getting hydrated and fed. And they'll, you know, I do this every other day at this time of year for these that are in the house at the moment. I can't quite get another one in there, so the two biggies will have to go in separately. And then I just leave them there for a while. The length of time is undetermined because I'm watering other things at the same time, and it'll be when I remember that they're in there and they need to come out and drip off a bit before they go back in the house, or I get drips on my wooden bits on the table, which is not on. Yeah, so that's how I water my mounted phals. Come the longer days, I may change the way I water my mounts for this year. It won't have been done before, but the plan, as yet to be executed, is to get another bucket like that, big one. Obviously the bigger the bucket, the more plants you can get in, and the more you can do at once. But it will slow me down because I can only get so many plants in there, and sometimes it'll only be one because some of the mounts are big. So it will slow me down. I can pour water over the mount and hang it up to drip in seconds, but to give it a proper good soak and really hydrate those roots will take longer, so it will slow me down. But it might be a worthwhile exercise to really hydrate the mounts in their growing season. So that's the plan. The reason for a second bucket is the level of feed in the water. As obviously a little and often is my policy. The exception is the Vandas. They get the often bit, but they get higher levels of feed. They are feeders, and the reason why these phals are okay in the Vanda feed is that they don't mind higher levels of feed as well. I have yet to have it proved to me that they need higher levels of feed, but I know they can take it. There is a difference, you know. So anyway, at the moment, every other day, chuck them in the bucket, leave them to soak, and take them out, let them drip, take them back in the house. That's the way I water the mounted phals at the moment. And I may continue to do it that way. You know, it's no big deal. I'm watering pots at the moment. So while they're sat in there, they're not wasting my time. They're using time that I'm doing other things with. So I'm happy with that for now. Another request. Somebody asked how the last Miltoniopsis I bought was doing. And did I repot it? Well, you know me and Miltoniopsis. They go downhill at the slightest thing going wrong. And the most frequent thing that goes wrong with these is they've already been in their pot too long when you buy them. So they are already an emergency need for a repot. Well, this was in bloom when I got it. I bought it as a yellow Miltoniopsis, but as it turned out, it was a colour changer. So although it started off a nice delicate pale yellow, it then faded to a straw colour and eventually turned white. So it's a nice colour changer, but it's been repotted. It had some reasonable roots and it's now pushing up a new growth. And I know exactly what's going to happen with that new growth. When it starts to push up new roots, they're going to climb up that bract, yeah, and miss the media. So at some point, as soon as I see those roots starting, I will remove that bract and expose the base of that new growth so that the roots head downwards and get in the media. Otherwise I'll end up with a lot of aerial roots which are just not so easy for these plants to stay hydrated. So yes, it's doing okay. It is pushing up a new growth. 2 would have been nice, but it's got one. That'll do for now, and it's still with us. Again, that will do for now. Postman Pat's just been, and I wasn't expecting anything in parcels. This shows how good my memory is. That might give you a clue. You remember a while back, Rachel did a draw, and the winners got a copy of her book. So it's just arrived. I now have reading to do. And this is about all sorts of things, so it should be a nice general read. Really looking forward to that. Thanks a bunch, Rachel. It's alright, that I've had to cover up addresses because my address is in great big letters, Rachel's address is on the sender's label, so that's why it's got an envelope sat on the top. Yeah, so a book to read. Wonderful. So there we go, I've opened the package. This is Rachel's book. I'm really looking forward to this because it literally is hopefully just going to take take me through the stages of from where this garden started to being available to be open to the public. So I'm really looking forward to that. And a lovely card inside. Boris Viaduct I've never heard of. I assume that's in Ireland. And just looking at that scenery is just encouraging me to get my trip over to Ireland organised. It's on the cards. Whether it can actually take place or not I don't know yet, but we shall have to wait and see. And what have we got? Congratulations on winning my giveaway, and apologise for the length of time, but it was all sold out over Christmas, which isn't a bad thing. Anyway, I wish you happy reading and keep making the great videos. Thanks Rachel, thanks a bunch. Yeah, smashing. I'm not a big reader, but when something comes up like that that's sort of personal, yes, I can read. So we'll give that a go. Not all at once, bit at a time. Okay, the Phalaenopsis have just come out the bucket, and that is a lovely demonstration. Phalaenopsis grow on trees in the wild. Now, I know these are all hybrids, but they still have their origins from sitting on the sides of tree trunks and things like that. And with the plant at that angle, what's happening to the water in the leaf joints? It's just running off. Yeah, so all I've got to do is let them drip for a while, then they can go back in the house. When they're standing upright, you do have the possibilities, if you get your plants wet, of water sitting around in leaf joints and worse still in the crown, especially if you've got a delicate young leaf just coming out. That's not going to do them much good. And if you start getting lower temperatures and leave water lying around like that, you are just prone to rot. But that's how they would naturally grow, on their sides, and the water just runs off. That's how they grow. So mounting them is good, but when you get those huge big strappy things, looking after them on a mount's not that easy because they don't like staying there, they're so heavy. But on these little mini ones it's good, they work well. Right, that's that done. This sun's just getting too strong now, especially on the cooler growers, shady lovers, that sort of thing. It's just pushing my luck. So this is temporary. It's just held up with 4 screws and dangling, and later in the day it can come down, but for now I need it. That sun's coming straight in that glass on things like Restrepias and Masdevallias, so needs to be done. And all I've done is just put 4 little screws along, reusing the holes that were made when the battens held the shade netting on, so I haven't even had to make new screw holes. And then later in the day I can just take the 4 screws out, bundle it up and repeat the process on days where it's necessary, because it's certainly not necessary to be shading plants all the time at this time of year, but in that direct sun it's just too much. And I've left the obviously the resting dendrobiums and some other things can take the bright light, so that's why I've sort of stopped near the top and left a bit for the sun to come in. So that'll do for now, temporary measure. Another request, somebody asked how my Bifrenaria was doing. This is Harrisoniae, something like that. Let me have a look. I've actually got a tag. Harrisoniae, yeah, something like that. It's doing okay. Literally I dunked the mount in a pot with some chunky bark just to allow those roots to stay hydrated longer than they would do by watering it on the mount. It seemed to be getting a bit dehydrated. Well, the latest couple of growths plumped up as a consequence, and the latest new growth is pushing up a leaf equal to or slightly larger than the previous one. That new growth hasn't started roots yet, but it will do soon. And then I have to worry, do I leave it in the pot as it is, because it's a bit squashed in there, or do I go back to trying to water it as a mount? I'll have to wait and see. But it seems to have responded to having the roots hydrated for longer rather than just on a mount. It's coming on, still not bloomed. Why won't you bloom list? On you go. Okay, that'll do for this one. I've finished watering for the day. I'm soaking my last Vanda. I've just run out of water and feed, and it's that sort of time of day where I've had enough. So I'll pick it up again tomorrow. I'll have the possibility of 2 videos on the go. I've got everything in bloom on the 8th, which I will do. That's a regular update. and anything else I come across while I'm watering can sort of start a new video and continue on to the next day if necessary, if there's anything to film. So thanks for dropping by, lots of bits and pieces this time, and see you next time. Knocked out a few requests today, a few more queuing up there, so I can get on with those. See you next time.